Hi, everybody. My name is Jennifer Cunningham. I am the Assistant Vice President for Alumni Relations at Lehigh and the host of today's Mountain Talk with the Center for Gender Equity. Just a little bit of housekeeping. We'll be going until 1 o'clock. We have a hard stop at 1. Rita and her colleagues here are going to speak with us for a few minutes, sharing what they do and the importance of the center. And giving a little bit of advice on what we can do to promote gender equity in our spheres. And then we will open it up to your questions via the chat. So at the bottom of your screen is a little thing that looks like a cartoon that says chat. Just click on that. And you can either make your questions available to everyone so that everyone on the webinar will see, or just to the panelists. I will read the questions aloud. And that will give Rita and the other two panelists a chance to respond and think about that versus having to read all the chat. As they're speaking to, you can write questions or comments in there as we go along, but this the success of these webinars does depend on your participation. So I hope that you will ask a lot of questions, make a lot of comments. Let's make this a discussion. That is just the start of a discussion. Actually, it'd be great to keep in touch afterwards as well. So we are being recorded. I have to say that for legal reasons. So now I'm going to introduce Dr. Rita Jones. She is the director of the center and has been at Lehigh for about 14 years. She got her bachelor's at the College of Idaho. Is that correct? College of Idaho, and then her master's and PhD at Washington State University in Pullman, Washington. And I will turn it over to you, Dr. Jones.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hello, everyone. So excited to be here. I'm so excited to be here with Tanari and Michelina. And I just want to say thank you to Jennifer and to Lindsay Drake and the entire Development and Alumni Relations team for inviting us in to chat as part of the Soaring Together celebration. The Center for Gender Equity is also celebrating 30 years here at Lehigh. So it's just like, yay, celebrate, celebrate, celebrate. So loving it. I'm going to let Michelina and Tanari introduce themselves. Michelina is a current assistant at the Center for Gender Equity. Tanari was an assistant for her 4 years here. I'm going to talk just a little bit about the overview of what we're going to do. So Michelina will talk about how and where she's building content and skills around gender equity and what she's doing with those here at Lehigh. And then Tanari will kind of pull from that, like reflect quickly on this is what I took and here's what I'm continuing to do post Lehigh. So just quickly, a little bit about our mission at the Center for Gender Equity. We are here to create a gender equitable campus that exposes and removes today's systemic and social gender related barriers to inclusive excellence, and to prepare students, staff, and faculty for a socially just tomorrow. As part of that latter piece, preparing for a socially just tomorrow, we believe that we need to provide people with a robust, what we're calling toolkit for gender equity. So that's both transferable skills, the how that the work is done, as well as the what. So we also provide content through curriculum meetings. It has to be that combination. And we want people to be able to develop those skills and use those throughout their entire lives. At the center, we use a feminist praxis foundation, and the shorthand that I use for that is inform, engage, and act. So inform is that learning piece. That's a lot of the content. It requires a lot of listening. We do a lot of listening skills and listening development, listening to understand rather than listening to respond. And that's pretty much focused on the self. So how am I learning? How am I figuring out this information to end gender domination? Then I can move into engage. So that's where I'm speaking. I'm using my voice, or maybe I'm writing blogs. I'm participating through written word. Maybe I'm doing creative pieces. But that moves me into talking with and in conversation with others. So it's not just me, it's also then into that interpersonal, maybe group element. And that's the part that Michelina will probably be talking somewhat about too, because that's the practice part. Like how did it feel? And then act. So now I've got a plan, I've got a robust toolkit, I'm ready to head out and make some changes. That is that larger community piece. I'm talking about social structures and systemic sexism, transphobia, misogynoir, like how can I pull those pieces apart and what can I do to make a larger change? That's sometimes what happens after Lehigh, but it can also happen during time at Lehigh. The praxis model is then after I've done those things, I go back to inform and I sort of ask myself, how did it work? What would I change? And that just keeps ever expanding or swapping out tools in the toolkit. So I'm going to turn it over to Michelina to talk a little bit about what she's been doing the past 3.5-ish years during her time here at Lehigh.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michelina. I'm a senior, so I'm at my 4th year at the Center for Gender Equity. I guess it would be important for me to start out by saying that when I first entered the center, I didn't really know much about feminist praxis. I didn't know what it meant for me to implicate these sort of tools into my everyday life. So I was coming from a very blank slate, which I think is important because it just shows that anyone can start from any position and still do this type of gender equity work. It took me a little bit of time to find my groove in terms of my interest and passions at the center, but I ultimately settled on Nurse Family Partnership, which is an organization in the Lehigh Valley, and also it is a national organization that aims to aid new and low-income mothers during pregnancy and childbirth by providing each family with a home nurse up until the child's 2nd birthday. So this is really good for things such as decreasing maternal morbidity rates and infant mortality rates. And there's a lot of research that goes into that. So I guess throughout my past 3 years at the center, I've been basically learning to create my own toolbox. And I've been learning a lot in terms of feminist theory, but also things that I think people can implement in their everyday lives, such as active listening. We do a lot of storytelling at the center, which I think is really important in terms of engaging with other people. Throughout my time at the center, I have garnered the ability to sort of create and facilitate conversations that provide a safe space for people to share those types of stories. It's actually something I'm doing tonight. I'm hosting an event talking about the ethnic and racial disparities in maternal fetal health. So that is something I will be implementing in just a few hours. Another thing that I'm learning is, besides active listening, is just being able to engage with people on a more interpersonal level. I think that if we want to do this type of work, we have to go beyond more a surface level understanding of who people are when we come into contact with them, which is something I'm also hoping to implement tonight. I guess a big thing that I would take away that I am learning and implementing at the center is learning how to make mistakes. A part of feminist praxis is sort of assessing what went well and what went wrong, and then being able to go back, reassess what went wrong, and then try again. So I have had some shortcomings at my time at the center, but I've only been able to use those as a form of growth to propel me forward and to be able to continue to do this praxis work. And I think it's really important, and it has really molded me into the person that I am today. And honestly, the center has been probably the most integral part of my college experience. It's usually what I highlight when I talk about Lehigh. So I guess a lot of it of what I've been doing so far has just been the second part of the Inform, Engage, Act. So I've been learning things along the way, but I've also been engaging with other people. And I can only hope that I can act on, more institutional and on a structural level by the time that I graduate. And I think I will be able to, because I think I've harnessed enough of those skills to do that. So thank you. I would now like to pass it on to Tanari, who I did have the pleasure of working with for my first year, but only for a year, sadly. So I'm excited to see her back.
Thank you so much, Michelina. Hi, everyone. My name is Tanairy, or Tanari, And I graduated from Lehigh in 2019. I did my full 4 years at the Center for Gender Equity as a work study student. And I can honestly say I am, 3 years now out of college, and everything that I learned at the center still resonates, and I see it in my life today. I kind of joined the Center for Gender Equity on, it was kind of weird. I basically just walked in. I needed a work study position. I really had no idea about feminist praxis. I had no idea what the Center for Gender Equity did. I just knew I needed a job. And also part of me was really curious. I grew up in a religious household, and I was not really allowed to talk about these things. I was not able to interact with people in a feminist praxis kind of way. And I had to do a lot of unlearning and relearning, which I did at the center. It was there where I started off as a graphic designer, just designing buttons for the center. And eventually I was moved into a discussion leader for the Gender in a Global Context series, which Rita saw over for the full 4 years when I first was learning under Kima, who was a senior when I was a freshman. And when she graduated, I took over. And basically what I was doing, I would host monthly discussions on just different feminist topics around the world. So some of the things that I kind of presented during my 4 years were things like female genital cutting that is often done in the continent of Africa. I discussed the K-pop industry and the beauty standards that are really harmful. I did a presentation on Barbie's redesign and things like that. Discussions that you usually wouldn't have in class. And I think it's really important for students to take advantage of these kind of discussions that are happening on campus 3 years out, and I am still talking about them with the people around me, trying to engage with people with really fruitful discussions where we can assess and analyze and maybe like change some of these occurrences that happen throughout. And I'm really, really happy about the opportunity because really, I mean, now that I'm out of college, I've had to do a lot of career search and, applying to different jobs. And I had a 6-month contract at the Pan American Health Organization as a human resources assistant, where I was basically in charge of recruitment. And I saw that every job post, I was in charge of posting these job posts. Many of them required gender training. They wanted people to work for our organization that had already this kind of training. So this is why I think current students take advantage of the fact that you have so many wonderful students that are, hosting these discussions, who are willing to have these difficult topics be presented on campus. Take advantage of that because employers are looking for people who are knowledgeable in gender disparities, in sexism, and things like that, and how to destroy these kind of systems that are often so intertwined into different companies and different organizations and things like that. So without any more to say, I'm extremely grateful for the 4 years that I spent at the Center for Gender Equity. I learned a lot. I had to do a lot of unlearning, and it's honestly one of the best experiences that I have. And I talk about it all the time with my coworkers, with my friends. I would not give up, what I went through and what I learned. I think this is going to stay with me for the rest of my life. So yeah.
Nice. So I wanted to ask what it's the word you just used, Tanari.
Yeah.
Unlearning. That's really interesting. You don't think about coming to university to unlearn. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because I'm guessing that a lot of us have a similar experience. I just haven't thought about it that way.
Yeah, so I grew up in a Pentecostal community where I was basically taught to be fearful of my own sexuality, to be fearful of like my own body. It took me, since we are in I'm hoping this is a safe space, but it took me about 18 years to just finally look at myself in the mirror, like fully naked. Just because I was brought up in such a religious and conservative household, as long and as well, like having to unlearn a lot of things about sex overall, about sexuality, unlearning a lot about like gender disparities and things like that. I had to kind of relearn all of those things. So I remember one of my first events at the Center for Gender Equity was a sex positivity party. Where basically we just had like condoms out and they were teaching us about like birth control and things like that, things that I was not exposed to because of my conservative and religious upbringing. So there was like a lot of unlearning, thinking, this is wrong to this is actually okay as long as I do it safely, as long as I know that, I can do it safely, that I can be a sexual being without having to like really feel bad about it or feel like fearful of it, fearful of myself, fearful of the thoughts that I was having or like things like that, like a lot of unlearning that I had to do. And it took the 4 years. There's still a lot of unlearning that I'm continuing to this day. But part of that process is just realizing, it is okay to do certain things. It is even better when you are being offered this kind of education for free, just walking into any kind of event and realizing that I can have a discussion and not be judged. And so for me, that was the most important thing for me at the center was the fact that I was having these discussions. I was talking about, how I grew up and no one was judging me. And instead they were willing to kind of help me process all of that. So yeah, unlearning. I think everyone should do it once in a while.
That'd be a really unique marketing tactic for Lehigh, right? Come here to unlearn.
Yes.
So I do want to invite our participants to put any questions or comments in the chat. While you're doing that, I will just pick up on some things that I heard. Rita, from the center's point of view, so you're not an academic college. People don't come and get a bachelor's or do a major in this. So people from a whole, well, yes, you can get, but like the center itself is not the college of. So you see a wide swath of students coming in. Is there any theme, like, is there any kind of, not stereotype, but do you just notice, like, what is it about the students who come into the center? Is there something common that you see, and what is that?
Well, I would say one common element is passion. The students that I've seen over the last 14 years are very passionate. They sometimes come in passionate about environmental justice or reproductive justice or racial justice or gender justice. But there's some passion that brings them here. And I would say the most heartwarming comment that I heard that I would say encapsulates, or I hope encapsulates, a lot of the commonality is, I'm really not sure what you do, but you all seem like really nice people, and others said that everyone would welcome me here. So can I join your team? And that, I think, is a common of that, lack of judgment that Tanari was talking about. Like, okay, I don't know who you are. I want to know who you are. I want to listen to learn who you are. We're all here learning together. Let's do it. Let's do it in a positive, fun way. And then I would say some of the commonalities stop, which is what I think is also very powerful about the center is I do see us putting into action Audre Lorde's notion of difference as creative potential. that we have folks, as you said, from all across campus. We have undergraduates, we have graduate students, volunteers, interns, work study students, and everyone's coming at it from a different major, a different college, different organizations on campus with which they are involved. And they all wanted to know, like, oh, you're in that? Well, tell me about that. Or you do this? Tell me about that. So that curiosity and seeing that power in the difference as a positive instead of something that people are trying to get through. So I guess that's what I've seen.
Nice, nice. So I write a column every alumni bulletin, and this last one, it was a Soaring Together 50 Years of Coeducation at Lehigh theme. And I actually chose to write about men, which may sound a little odd, but it was men from who were there 50 years ago when women came on campus. And these were men whose lives were changed because women came to Lehigh. And they talk about how much they benefited. So it sort of made me wonder about the question, today's men. You know, a lot of times when we talk about feminism, it's a discussion among women only of how do we empower ourselves. But do you have any tips for how men can get involved? Like what kind of skills can they put in their gender equity toolbox? And can you answer that without saying, the men, I've heard men say, well, I just had a daughter, so I feel like I need to learn about that. Like they're only doing it because now they have a daughter, or like how can men benefit from feminism, and what can they do to learn more about it? Maybe I'll ask Michelina because we haven't heard as much from you.
So yeah, I think one of the first things that men can do, especially those who identify as cis heterosexual men, is to foster as many genuine relationships with folks who do not identify as cis and heterosexual men. I think that is a great gateway into just beginning the journey of understanding people's stories and trying to, you know, comprehend and empathize with other people's perspectives, which is something that does take practice, but I think it's something that we can all strive to achieve for. Another thing I would put in the toolbox is to practice vulnerability. I think vulnerability is such an amazing skill and tool that you can use to connect with people on more than a, you know, subsurface level. And I think when you let your guard down and allow yourself to be able to be open-minded to different perspectives and learnings, I think the most growth comes when you're in positions when you're uncomfortable. And then I guess one last thing I would say is, you know, to be gentle and kind to yourself. You know, we are all on this particular journey, not going at the same pace, and we're all on different parts of the journey. And that's one thing that I love about spaces such as the Center for Gender Equity, is that, like Tanari said, it is such a non-judgmental space. I would consider it more of a brave space than a safe space, because the center really does challenge you to, you know, rethink some of the beliefs you have and maybe unlearn some things that were problematic in the past. But you're doing it in such an environment that you're going to garner support from almost every angle that you are sitting in. And you know, this stuff takes time, but I think just being open-minded about it is a great place to start.
Right. So the center is extremely supportive. When you get out into the real world, not so much. So how do you all suggest, those of us who are, I mean, all of us, I think on this webinar, just by being here, are on a journey. But how do you have tips and tricks and sort of the BuzzFeed top 10 ways to get your neighbor to stop being such a misogynist? You know, like what can we do? Those of us who are not trained in the feminist praxis and some of the other specialties that you have, what can we do to continue to spread the you know, this kind of learning outside? I mean, sending them to the Center for Gender Equity when they're at Lehigh is one thing, but when we're out in the real world, what do we do? Rita, Tanari?
I really wish I had like a concrete, here are 10 steps that you can take so that, you know, everyone in your life knows about, you know, feminism and knows about these things. The truth is that it's really complicated. It's extremely complicated, because even at Lehigh, I remember we were trying so hard to reach to the fraternity groups, to try to host events without it feeling like they were getting in trouble, which is usually what was happening. It was every time that there was a sexual assault claim or something, they would send them over to the Center for Gender Equity. It would make it seem as a punishment to them entering that space. So it was like very difficult to get it across, you know what, this is actually important for you, because out in the world, you're going to face consequences for the kind of things that you are currently doing. So, and especially since we're talking about like cis men especially, and we have to recognize that there's a patriarchal kind of system that puts them in favor over anyone else. And so I think first step, if there's anything, it's recognizing those privileges that each person has. It's recognizing or making people recognize per se the kind of privileges that they are holding on to as they're entering some sort of space, and at least hosting a discussion, a friendly, you know, discussion, in order to just kind of go over about how those things can affect how they interact with others. I think that's part of feminist praxis, is overall just recognizing oneself, recognizing the kind of privileges or disadvantages that we kind of bring into a space, and try to see how we can use that privilege for others. You know, the first thing that I want to say is that when you are entering the Center for Gender Equity, it should never be a space to feel judged. We keep talking about, you know, it's a non-judgmental zone, but throughout my 4 years, I have seen, for example, cis men coming into the space and then feeling really awkward or feeling really left out. And it's, you know, it's good to remind them that that space is also for them, that's why we're there. It's also for them. It's not just to completely have all the women there and then just have, because we're just preaching to the choir at that point. I think it's important to kind of reestablish how that space can help them out as well, to unlearn and to relearn and to, you know, be able to engage in these discussions that can eventually help them out once they're out of Lehigh and they don't have that support anymore. So I think that there should be more support towards the center, especially from leadership. I would love for, you know, Lehigh leaders to put a little bit more focus at, you know, for the Center for Gender Equity, as well as the Pride Center, as well as OMA. These are centers that need to be supported fully by the institution. And as an alumni, I keep looking back and I see that there is some support, but there should be more support overall. Anyway, I don't know if this answers the question. I wish there was a clear-cut line, a clear way to be able to assess and be able to kind of, you know, give everyone easy steps to be the perfect feminist, but unfortunately that's not how it happens. It's really difficult. It's a really extensive process. It's a process that I'm still going through. I'm still unlearning, you know. It doesn't happen from night to day. Right.
Agree. One community is parents, and Rita, you've been a Lehigh parent for a couple of years now. Do you all ever work with parents, and like during orientation weeks or before they get here? Is there, because a lot of times the parents will have influence on how their kids are spending time, and if you read the parents' Facebook page, they're very involved with their kids' lives. Is that an audience you've had any success with or reached out to at all?
That's a great question. It is not really a community with whom we've had intentional engagement. I think that's a great question, because being in the dual role now of someone who is a parent And then also an administrator here is, I also know that for as much as I might think I'm involved in my son's life, I'm not really. Like, I mean, like stuff I will tell him things like, hey, here's this opportunity, here's that opportunity. I don't know if it goes. But I think that there might be additional tools that we could provide families of, here's a resource. If you, like, even just if you feel like your student is questioning whether or not I belong at Lehigh, send them to the center, send them to the lounge, because there's always a group of people in there who are like, hey, hi, who are you? Like, hang out. And it's not a space where folks are like, and now let me tell you about feminism. It's more of just like, hello, let's chat. What's your major? What's going on today? And if someone wants to engage in a conversation around gender equity, cool. But it's also a lounge, a true lounge for students to just hang out in, and be with people without any adults in the room. So like, I would love even for that, for parents to know, hey, if you're, I've heard that the Center Lounge is a pretty cool place. Have you been over there?
Right. Yeah, I hear from parents sometimes who are alums themselves saying my student's having a tough time. They're not an athlete. They're not in Greek. They're not in music. They don't have a place. Can you, and so now I'll put on my list, Center for Gender Equity. Michelina, I was wondering, what are you thinking you want to do after graduation?
Funny story. I did spend 3 years of my college experience planning on going to medical school. And then, I stopped lying to myself and I was like, no, that's not for me. But the good thing is that I somehow was brave enough to, go against my parents' wishes and find myself in a space like the center that really opened my eyes towards, endless possibilities of jobs that I could get after graduation that have to do with this type of work. I think the center really ultimately changed my life trajectory, as dramatic as that sounds. But I guess I'm not exactly sure where I'm going to end up yet, if I'm being completely candid and vulnerable, which I do think, there is something positive about just things being left to unravel. But I do think I'm going to end up somewhere in the realm of gender equity, human services, counseling type of work, because I really enjoy the work that I do at the center. And I think one of the best things about being at the center is the type of people that I meet and the conversations that I have. I think there is so much power in conversations. And I guess that's one thing I'd say to those who are looking to, take this type of work outside of just Lehigh, is you sort of have to be your own center for gender equity when you go out into the world, and you have to embody, being non-judgmental, being empathetic. I always like to try to lead with kindness and education, and, the types of topics we talk about at the center can sometimes be emotionally charged, and just learning throughout the way of, having the emotional regulation skills to be able to take a step back when you need to, and, to accept the fact that sometimes you're not going to, change people's minds. And I mean, that's a big thing, but I think just having a type of conversation with someone like that is a good enough step for me in terms of making progress outside of Lehigh. So I'm definitely going to continue having more conversations about this after graduation. So I guess that's as concrete as I'm going to be right now, but I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful. As you were talking, when you were talking about the introduction, I was thinking, your wisdom, you seem a lot more wisdomous than a senior, like I was impressed with just everything you were saying about learning and making mistakes and I just think that's wonderful. So it's curious to me being the alumni director, I'm always just so curious, what do they think they're going to do? And then what do they actually do? You know? So Tanari, what are you doing now?
So I was actually a Peace Corps volunteer right out of college. I became a Peace Corps volunteer in China, and then COVID happened. So then I entered unemployment, and then I went to Korea. I went to South Korea for a little bit. I've been all over basically, but I'm finally working for the Smithsonian. I'm just here as a management support assistant, but this is a job that I got through thanks to the Center for Gender Equity. Not to give it too much credit, no, I am, but I had things to talk about during the interview. You know, I did 4 years. I was, you know, completely blown away by the work that I did. You know, not to, you know, clap myself, you know, but the kind of work that I did at the Center for Gender Equity is really helping me out here now at the Smithsonian, just because there is a lot of work that, you know, I have to go through where it has a lot to do with gender and art, and I'm in charge of basically helping out with the exhibitions. And so there's a lot of talk about, you know, representing underrepresented voices in art, including women and things like that. And so it's so great to look back at my 4 years and be able to bring something into the conversation, and just like think back about the different events that I attended and be able to kind of engage in different discussions as we're having them. And so, yeah, that's what I'm doing now. I did have a little stint at the Pan American Health Organization I had a 6-month contract with them as a human resources assistant. And that's where I oversaw basically how gender equity or gender knowledge or feminist knowledge is needed for different types of jobs, especially for different doctors that we're looking for, or different, what we call them. Oh man, I'm trying to remember the title. But they're basically like consultants for the WHO in Latin America, and just asking them, you know, or asking them during the interview, hey, do you have this kind of knowledge? You know, can we address this? For me, it was just amazing to see that, you know, what we're doing at Center for Gender Equity is really, it's pretty much applicable in the real world. There are people who are looking for employees that have this kind of knowledge.
Yes, we've definitely seen that in the last year with the DE&I work as well. So many, I've seen just about every corporation, you know, wanting people that are certified in that as well. So I'm wondering too about what's next. I'm sure Rita, you and team, you've thought a lot about what the next 30 years, the next 60, 90 years, what's next? And also in that, tell us how alumni, even alumni who haven't been involved necessarily when they were on campus, how can they get involved?
I'm going to go really fast because I want to make sure Michelina can finish this. So I hope we're not here in 60 to 90 years, Jennifer. I hope that like we have worked ourselves out of a job. Like that is the goal, is that gender domination is over and we don't see, you know, people are gendered sex beings in whatever way they want, and everyone is like happy and loving it. In the short term, while we're trying to get there, I really want to see more along these finite toolkit options, like even your top 10. I'm happy to give people 3. You know, let's just start with 3 things. And so you want to fix this, so you want to fix this, so you want to fix that. We have a series of accessible 3 steps to creating gender equity in whatever realm it is, pulling from the awesome work that our assistants are already doing. Michelina, what do you want to see?
I'll say one new thing that we've been implementing in the center is making it a goal to complete one big thing for the year. You know, a lot of us will sometimes get lost in our own projects, but there is power in numbers and there are a lot of us at the center. So I think what I'm not going to be here, but what I hope to see for the future generations of the Center for Gender Equity is making these big changes. We have such big imaginations, and I would really like to see us making concrete, hardcore, institutionalized changes. I know one thing I was focused on when we were brainstorming of things we could change is how ridiculously overpriced the daycare is for grad students at Lehigh. It costs like $1,200 a month for daycare, which is more than my mom pays in rent. So I'd like to see that changed. And I think people at the center can definitely do that. And so I hope to see stuff like that happening. And our center being more than just a room on the UC second floor. I want the university to know who we are and to know how strong we are. And I want us to be a really dominant presence on campus.
Nice.
In terms of alum engagement, I think, those relationship building, storytelling, sharing their experiences. So one thing we're starting also to collect is even just from the small alum group we have with the center is, what's one thing you wish you knew when you were at Lehigh before you left, particularly around gender issues. And so we're also starting to get that list going as another kind of, we can then start talking about those really intentionally with students while they're here to create that preparation. So even the cycling back of, oof, please make sure you really talk to folks about this. Oh, make sure people have some strategies around that. Like even those kinds of stories from alums are incredibly powerful. So we are always, would love to have folks come back and share their stories, participate in conversations and dialogues. But even if it's just a, hey, Rita, here's a thing, like that quick little email goes a long way.
Right.
Can I also add a little bit as a current alumni, alumnus? I don't know. Anyway, alumna.
Yeah, the plural of it, if it's a group of all women, and this is my problem with Latin because they don't have non-gendered, it's alumni. Alumni is a group of women, but if there was a man here, we would all be alumni.
I see. Yeah, I always get those words wrong, but
so it's a big topic in my industry of like, we don't want to say alumni because that's the male. Anyway, diverse. Go ahead.
Love gender language. No, I was gonna say I would love to continue, or I would love to see the continuation of these programs. As I mentioned, I was in charge of the gender in a global context, and I see that kind of has continued, right? That topic has continued on even after I graduated, and I want to see that happening with many programs as they keep being implemented. I would love to see programs being built and created outside of that space as well, which we have done in the past, but because of COVID, everything has to be virtual, I guess. But, passing with the pandemic and everything else, I want to piggybacking on Michelina's idea, a bigger presence on campus for the Center for Gender Equity. I think it's very much needed.
Nice. Well, we are at 1 o'clock and we need to get you off to class or wherever you need to be at 1 o'clock. I, in my position as the director of alumni here, I will do whatever I can to get the word out. Giving Day is going to be coming up late April, so we will definitely talk to you all about that. But really appreciate you being here today, and congratulations on 30 years. And it would be awkward for me to say, like, I hope you don't last another 30, but per what you just said, that could be true. Really appreciate your time today, and whatever I can do in the alumni world, let me know. And thank you to everybody for joining us today.